Hey, history fans, welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video with Mr. Terry as I continue my search for historical knowledge found here on the internet. All right, today we are continuing on into the second half of Extra History's mini-series on the history of space travel. So this is episode 4, looks like it's titled Red Star. Now, where we left off was Sputnik went up, the first artificial satellite, showing at this time, the Soviet lead in this space race, and we'll see what the response is and how this really becomes a space race. But anyways, yeah, we're going to get going with this. So before we get going, though, let's get the shout outs out of the way. The original video link is down below. Make sure you watch it, click on it, and give them the view time and all that stuff. It's important that you do that. These guys are a supporter of the channel, and we love them, and they make such awesome content. So, all right, and if you haven't subbed here, love to have you around. Enable those notifications as well. Also, if you're into gaming, we've got the new gaming channel is up, Mr. Terry Gaming. There's a link down there to search for Mr. Terry Gaming. A lot of fun stuff going over there. And again, and also we still have some of the Mario Kart World War II shirts. If you're looking to get your history and gaming on, we got you covered in the Teespring campaign down below. All right, let's jump into it. We got rockets, y'all.
Preliminary stage. Intermediate.
Oh man,
Main.
Russians are going up.
Liftoff. We wish you a good flight. Everything's working fine. Goodbye. Until we
Yuri.
meet again, dear friends. Voyakare.
Yuri Gagarin, first person in space. Another Russian milestone achieved.
Those were the first words spoken just before. For the first time in human history, a human being left the confines of our small blue planet. But that exchange wouldn't be for a long time yet. Right now, World War II has just ended in atomic fire. Two massive superpowers cast their shadow across the globe. And as the world rebuilds from the greatest conflict in human history, everyone waits uneasily for the inevitable showdown between these giants.
It's what everyone thought. You know, when World War I ended, there was that famous thing, right? The war to end all wars. Obviously, it wasn't the case. So when World War II ended, I think that optimism, if you want to call it that, all right, nobody would want to fight a war like this anymore because look what happened. It's obviously devastating. But nobody was saying that after World War II, right? Even though the casualties blew World War I out of the water, people were still like, okay, there's still a lot of problems. Specifically what's now happened to the United States and Soviet Union, who are now the superpowers surviving after this war. And very quickly, within 4 years of the end of the war, both countries had atomic weapons. And now you see the race going on. People are very scared because not only do a lot of people think this war is inevitable, but it's atomic. And after seeing what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, people now feel that this is what war is now. It's massive strikes that can annihilate cities. That's what the future is. So it's a lot more pessimistic. And understandably so.
This telling of humanity's quest for the stars is brought to you by Warframe's most awesome
More
expansion
Warframe.
yet, Empyrean. To prepare for the all-new spacefaring action yourself for free, and be entered for a chance to win $250,000 towards an actual trip to actual space, check out the game at the link below. By the
Elon?
1950s, the Soviets had tested their first nuclear bomb. Soon after, fusion weapons were developed that could deliver a larger explosive charge than all of the munitions fired in the Second World War.
That's one of the
And
craziest
thus,
things
the space
about developing a weaponry is the things that were used in World War II, and then even the bombs that were used on Japan, the atomic weapons, become tiny little things very quickly into what they could actually make, that make those things look like a firecracker versus, you know, a grenade. Like it's night and day. It's scary how fast this destructive power went. It got obviously way bigger than of destruction that you would ever need.
race began. Not as a noble endeavor to get to the stars, but as a military program to find ways
That's
of
what
raining
fueled the
down
space
destruction
race.
on each other from continents away. As a way to build missiles that could reach across oceans by briefly reaching the stars.
I truly think it's important for you to understand that the space race does not happen without the Cold War. If this happened in true peacetime, I don't think you get any of this. You don't get any of this. The motivation was develop technologies to protect yourself.
After all,
destroy
what
someone
good
else.
are city-obliterating weapons if you can't get them to the cities you want to obliterate?
Yeah.
And it's in this atmosphere of conflict
dropping
that a
them by
man named
plane isn't gonna
Korolev
work
enters
anymore.
our story. He was a rocket engineer in the early Soviet days who was thrown into a gulag during the Stalinist purges, only to be hauled back out and put into a nicer prison when Stalin needed him to work on rockets again. After the war ended, he was put in charge of the Soviet ballistic missile program. His work is so secretive, no one will even be allowed to use his name. He would be
No.
referred to as chief designer for most of his life. He was mostly a cautious man, but one fateful day, on the
Wild
30th of
sauce.
January,
Want hot sauce.
1956, he did something bold. He told the Presidia,
sauce.
the highest council in the Soviet Union, that he could beat the Americans to space.
Oh man.
Except due to bureaucracy, he was wrong. Because trying to get the Academy of Sciences, the Ministry of the Defense Industry, the Ministry of the Radio-Technical Industry, the Ministry of the Shipbuilding Industry, the Ministry of the Machine Building Industry, and the Ministry of Defense to all work together was like herding, oh, I don't know, let's say a Ministry of Cats. Not to mention, the rocket program was military, and the Strategic Rocket Forces, who had no interest in space, could repurpose his funding at any time.
So one of the big criticisms of the Soviet Union, okay, from Stalin basically up to Gorbachev, was how big the government was, how complex it was, like they're saying here, right? And how difficult it was to get anything done. There's so much red tape going on because nothing is privatized. The government has to make all the decisions. There's so many different committees and processes to go. It's why things economically move slower. I mean, they move slower in a lot of this stuff. But you could see once you get the military involved in this kind of thing, then you can really get your budget and that sort of thing. This would not have happened in the private sector because there is no private sector. Doesn't exist.
So after 2 years, it was clear that his beloved satellite, full of scientific instruments, would not be ready in time to beat the similar model the Americans planned to launch. But then, he had a flash of brilliance. Just build a metal beach ball, slap some batteries on it, and give it a radio transmitter telling the world how great the Soviet Union is.
Sputnik?
That we can get into space, and we'll launch the complicated satellite in a year. And so for one furious month, his team manufactured
Basically,
the
it's a
thing,
test.
now dubbed Sputnik, stuck it on an intercontinental ballistic missile, and fired it into the heavens, where it would stay for 70 days, orbiting the Earth 1,440 times.
And then somebody caught it down below. Yeah, it had no purpose other than to get something into space. I mean, it just beamed some radio signals of no consequence. I'd said this in the last video, but this freaked out a lot of people in America because they're like, what is it? You know, is it a spy thing? Is it a weapon? People are freaking out. And let alone just the fact that the Soviet Union did something like this before the Americans had. America is losing technologically. And if America is losing this race, then what people thought as core American values are losing out to communism, right? That's what this whole thing came to be, is who's got the superior system. And the guinea pig of this, or where they wanted to show it off, was the space race. Whoever is winning that must be the superior culture.
And its message would be heard around the world. In every sleepy farm town, anyone with a shortwave radio could tune in and hear a message from space. A Russian
did it
message.
say?
This shattered the American
What did it
idea
say?
that they were a scientific superpower competing against a
Tripolowski?
brutal backward state. And all of a sudden, it was a race to the stars. The American government stepped up efforts to enhance their
NASA
space
time.
program and find an area where they could
TIE
compete.
fighter.
Meanwhile, the Soviet government, genuinely surprised and pleased at the amount of positive attention the launch had gotten the USSR, ordered Korolev to continue. But now, things would get harder. He could no longer just send up beach balls. The next achievement had to be a real achievement, and not just
Something
a tricky
living.
workaround. Even scientific satellites were
Animals
not enough.
first, right?
He had to get a human being into space. But the Soviet space program worked on a project basis. No orders from the leadership, no guiding national mission or government commitment. Korolev, or someone from a rival design bureau, would just ask to do something, and if they got a yes, they'd do it. It was wholly unlike the US program, where all of the engineers, scientists, and pilots worked for a single team under NASA. Here, each agency and each bureau were fighting for funding, recognition, and government attention.
Hard to get something efficient when you have so many people involved, right? Too many cooks in the kitchen.
But one of Korolev's strengths, perhaps even more important than his skills as an engineer, was his ability as a project manager. Yeah, shout out to the producers. Yet he'd face a revelation that would almost derail everything. You see, he found out that his old friend Glushko, his chief engine designer, was one of the people who'd gotten him thrown in the gulag. So as you can imagine, their working relationship would subsequently become rocky. But even despite all of the rivalries, despite all the petty sabotage, progress began being made. They had a lead over the Americans, and human spaceflight was a problem Korolev had been thinking about for a long, long time. Early tests were rough on their crew.
I don't know if you have anybody really on the American side like this Korolev guy, who's basically he's the guy. You do have a lot of people now. It's one organization within NASA, but it's like, it looks like the Soviet Union, you got one guy that's really doing this. And that can be, it's kind of high risk, high rewards. The fact if this person is incompetent, then it's going to ruin the whole operation. But it sounds like Korolev is, I mean, he's really good for this job here. But yeah, they're going to, they got to get organisms up there. So I know they're going to send up animals first.
In fact, a few ran away before liftoff. But eventually, he had a rocket that could go to space and a capsule that could come back with a living, breathing being in it. So now, they just needed a human to go up in the thing. So the Soviet Union took 200 of their fittest Air Force pilots and began to train them for humanity's first venture into the great up and out. Unfortunately, though, no one really knew exactly what being in space would do to a person. So they basically threw everything they could at these pilots. They put them in sensory deprivation tanks, spun them around in giant centrifuges, even put them in hyperbaric chambers and pumped all of the air out.
I mean, you could sit there and hypothesize with sensory equipment or something about what it actually is like to be up there, but space is no joke when it comes to that. It's trying to kill you, pretty much. It's not meant to be there. You know what I mean? We're defying all of these this physical and non-physical environment that we have that we're defying it when it's trying to literally destroy us. So I don't care who you are, that you're going up there. It doesn't matter if you're Yuri Gagarin, the first person to go to space, or you're those guys last week that went up in SpaceX that launched up on the Dragon capsule up to the ISS. It's no joke. No joke.
But they only had one simulator for the actual cockpit of the spacecraft. So they chose the 6 most qualified candidates and put them on a crash course to being cosmonauts. Then the fateful day came.
Can we appreciate how much cooler the word cosmonaut is than an astronaut? I just think that's a great word.
Yuri Gagarin, at the age of 27, has been chosen to be the first
He's only
person
27,
in space.
wow.
He settles into the capsule. A ground crew seals him in. Systems checks begin. The boards
He's
are
crapping
all
his
green.
pants.
Then, a message from Gagarin. He thinks the capsule isn't fully sealed. 2 more hours pass, and it's checked and rechecked.
They're
And
putting
at last,
tape, duct tape.
Everything's good to go. Poyekale. The engines fire. The boosters fall away. The rocket rises. The final stage flames out, and the capsule separates. And Gagarin floats. The first person to ever see the Earth from beyond its pale blue veil.
I just think that would be a cool thing to do. You are the first person to look at the Earth from that view and just get that perspective, how big it is, and just like, hey, that's our history of our species out there, and I'm now looking at it from the outside. And I think that'd be a very emotional moment.
For an hour and 48 minutes, he would enjoy that view. Then he would begin his descent back to the Earth. 7 kilometers out, he's ejected from the craft, and his parachute deploys. He lands in the middle of the Russian countryside. A farmer and his daughter stand there slack-jawed, then start to back away as this creature in an orange suit and fishbowl helmet that just descended from the sky shouts to them, "I am a Soviet citizen like you, who has descended from space, and I must find a telephone to call Moscow." Somehow that line worked, and he got his phone call. Soon, the world knows.
It sounds like they didn't have the equipment or whatever, like to know exactly where he would be, or did they not think about that? Now you can just pinpoint exactly where they are. So he just lands in some farm. What?
Humanity has reached the stars. It was the height of Soviet spaceflight. Korolev began openly talking about his long-term dreams of going to the moon and even Mars. But, eventually, they had time. The Soviets were masters of rocketry, winners of the space race.
What, 15
and
years
then John
maybe?
F. Kennedy moved the goalposts. He announced to the world that within 10 years, America would put a man on the moon.
I mean, with Yuri Gagarin up, I mean, it's not even close. The Soviet Union is ahead of the Americans. They're beating every milestone. First to get something into space, an artificial satellite. First to get a person up there. The United States is way behind. So this commitment from JFK, which he said, by the end of the decade, because he got elected in he's there at 1960. And we do. I mean, the Americans do it. It's pretty late. It's July of 1969. But it does happen. But yeah, this was something, and a lot of people wanted to get behind it.
And no one in the USSR took it seriously. Kennedy was young after all, and his first
You'll never
year
see it,
had
of
been
course.
full of embarrassing failures.
He'll be
It was
assassinated.
only 3 years later, when Korolev started seeing the Jupiter rockets, that he realized the Soviet space program had blown its lead. They needed a bigger rocket and fast, but the new N-1s had major problems. Chief engine designer Glushko refused to build the engine Korolev wanted. Not to mention, the country's manufacturing wasn't up to the standards needed for a moon mission. Electrical failure was such a possibility that their best plan involved placing a spare lunar lander on the surface in case the first one didn't work.
Launching
Korolev
it
was
there.
running out of time. He started testing
Makes
the
sense.
N-1 in flight rather than on the ground. 4 in a row blew up on the pad. And in January 1966...
I mean, that's really bad. If you can't even get up, you're blowing up before you get out. Okay, then he dies.
Round. 4 in a row blew up on the pad. And in January 1966, he died of a heart attack, depriving the program of its leader.
Sounds like a
Yet-
huge thing because how we were saying how important he individually was. More important than any individual on the American side. So okay, so it starts to make sense because I was wondering a little bit about at what point do the Americans surpass the Soviets? I mean, is it just with the moon landing, or did that happen sometime in the 60s? And maybe now we can start to see with the death of Korolev that's when it's kind of starting to turn.
Yet 2 weeks later, the Russian Luna 9 probe achieved a soft landing on the moon.
First to do that.
Korolev had achieved his dream, but it would
Another
be humans
Russian
of
milestone.
another nation who would be the first to set foot on lunar soil.
While I understand the necessity for the nations of the ancient Earth to send animals into space, it saddens me that they didn't have the best
Warframe.
technology available at the time to protect them on their journey.
Yeah, hard same, Lotus. Though I think Zoe might have taken that idea to an extreme.
What do you mean? What did your master do now?
Again, my cat isn't my master.
Lies can only shield your pride for so long, Matt.
Like I was saying, Zoe was looking for a way to settle her kitty stomach because the artificial gravity was making a mean hairball situation, if you catch my drift. No, really, they were like literally drifting across the bridge, like.
Stop being gross and get to your point.
Well, she got into the Kavat incubator and may have infused one too many Smita genetic codes. See what I mean?
Aw, she has never looked more beautiful or deadly. She will make a fine addition to your loadout once you engage with Empyrean.
Fair point. With Warframe's newest expansion and its multi-role 4-player co-op railjack missions, I am going to need all the help I can get. Whether I'm infiltrating enemy ships from space, or defending, piloting, and maintaining my own craft, maybe having a charmed Kavatified Zoe at my side would be the best way to go. I just want to make sure to model real well, so I know that she's safe.
Oh, I think she will be just fine.
Ooh! Does Grenier Health Insurance even cover that?
Who's to say?
All right, good stuff. All right, so we are up in space now. We got a satellite up, we got a person up, and then we got a landing on the moon. Not manned yet. And again, all three of those, first satellite, first man in space, putting something on the moon, Soviet. Right? United States was clearly losing the space race. And again, how so many of American culture and Soviet culture was tied to this thing. It was just like what you put into. Again, like I was saying before, it's like whoever's winning this must be the superior society. And now, the longer this goes on, though, obviously the more strain it's going to have on the countries, especially economically. I think we fail to estimate how much, and I got to look at the numbers on this, but how much of our national budgets, okay, both Soviet and the United States, were put into this. And I think when we come out of this, we find out that as far as like a percentage of the economy, the Soviets are putting in more, right? But can they sustain that? Can they sustain that over years and years and years? And I know later on that ends up being an issue because, again, the percentage of the economy that the Soviet Union had to use on their space program is really going to hurt their country. And then those economic problems are going to really start to show up in the 1980s with how much of this going on. Plus, added to this as well is nuclear warheads that are being produced, which is really going to pick up. And you add those things together, and that's a huge part of your economy. And it's going to be a test of your economy. Can the communist system afford this, right? The American economy will be fine with it, although it spent way more than they do now, which is why a lot of these types of missions don't happen anymore, because we don't have the economic, they don't allocate the budget to do stuff like moon missions or anything anymore. They don't do that anymore. And that's something they'll get into later, I'm sure, which is, interestingly, after the moon landing, the space programs just died. They kind of died. They did. They were like, all right, I guess it's over. And then they focus more on nuclear warhead buildup after the 60s. But the space race, it's over. And then, people lost interest. I mean, there were more moon landings after the original 69 one. And what was kind of sad is people didn't care that much after the first one. So that was a big hit to the space program, which goes on halt for many years. And now, slowly crawling back. But it's been a while. All right. Well, this has been great. So that was episode 4. So stay tuned. Look out for episode 5. Hopefully you caught episodes 1 through 3 if you're looking for some commentary for myself there. But definitely go through those videos. Check out the original ones for sure. Make sure they're getting their view time and all of those things. Really important to do that. So we can promote these channels best we can. All right. With that, I think we're good. Thank you to everyone that's been here. Thank you, patrons, for being involved with the contributions you do. If that's something you want to get involved in, specifically, they get to vote on some of the videos they get out on this channel. Links in there. Also, join our community over at Discord. We got a thriving community. Also, if you're a gamer, we just launched, you'll see an announcement before about our Minecraft server, our Cool History Minecraft server. So look out for the information on that. You can find the Discord or in my previous videos and posts. But anyway, all right, with that, we'll go ahead and end it here. Thanks for being here, part of our little community. Hopefully continuing to grow. Thank you for 1 year. We literally hit 1 year anniversary yesterday. And I'm hoping for even more success and more awesome stuff here in the future. All right, we'll see you later. Bye.